Bonjour. Donc,
So do you guys have do you have it?
C'est un grand plaisir de vous accueillir dans le cadre d'un nouveau numéro de la série Vendredi du LARCEPM. Alors, excusez-moi, puisque notre invité ne comprend pas le français, il ne peut pas parler, ne peut pas comprendre ce que nous sommes en train de dire, raison pour laquelle je vais faire ma présentation en anglais. Alors, comme ça, il pourra comprendre ce que nous sommes en train de dire. So the intention was to do my speech in French, and just got to know that our guest don't speak French. So I try to speak English. At the outset, excuse me for my bad English. Our guest, Dr. Ron Moraine, Dr. Mohamed Bashis, dear colleagues, dear PhD students, dear dear audience, I welcome Dr. Ron Moraine and thanks him on behalf of all the members of CIRPEC for accepting our invitation. The main objective of each is to present our research and the main activities that we organize in our laboratory, LARCEPM. The center has existed since May 2017. It has carried out around 100 scientific activities in the form of workshops, seminars, symposiums, congress related to performance and competitiveness. During this period of confinement, we organized many scientific events using the technique of video conferencing. These focused in particular on socioeconomic topics related to the COVID-19 pandemic. As part of our laboratory, LARCEPM. LARCEPM means Research Laboratory of Economic Competitiveness and Managerial Performance. We launched a series of webinars called LARCEPM's Fridays, which is a weekly series that covered several aspects related to COVID-19. For example, scientific research, boosting tourism, employment, and logistics. Today's theme, entitled Online Assessment in Distance Learning, is of a paramount importance in the sense that the evaluation phase is the focal point of any pedagogical process. In the current era, technological advances have enabled several more reliable, effective evaluation opportunities to make an objective assessment of entire didactic operation. For this webinar, we will have the pleasure of listening to Dr. Ron Moraine, leading expert and responsible of staff development and assessment at the University of Duisburg-Essen. My dear colleagues, Latifa and Si Mohamed, will moderate the meeting, to whom I would like to take this opportunity to express my most sincere thanks, without forgetting to also thank Mr. Bouzid, Technical Manager, for all the efforts made to make this event and last events a success. I also thank Dr. Omar Hnish, Director of CIRPEC, for all the efforts that he has put in so that this webinar series can continue. Thank you and have a good webinar. Si Mohamed, I'm giving the mic back to you. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lekrasi, for these precious information about our research center. In the same order of ideas, I would like to thank as well Mr. Omar Hnish, who is the director of the Interdisciplinary Center of Research in Performance and Competitiveness, for encouraging us to do this webinar in English about a very present subject, which is online assessment strategies in distance learning. I would like to thank as well my fellow professor, Dr. Latifa Dadawi, who is a fellow member in the SIRPAC and Erasmus Plus National Coordinator. Thank you, Latifa, for agreeing to moderate this webinar with me. And before moving to our special guest today, I would like to thank our IT team, especially Mr. Bouzid for the helping with the technical aspects of this webinar. And lastly, my special gratitude goes to Mr. Ron Moraine, to Dr. Ron Moraine, for accepting to be with us today. This is the second webinar that we are doing together. We have already done one about project-based learning. It was a massive success. So I want to first introduce him to the audience. And if I want to do him justice, we would probably already be running out of time. That is to say how much massive and impressive his achievements are. So with no further ado, I want to say that Dr. Ron Moraine is an American, born and raised in Houston, Texas. He currently lives and works in Germany. He is a co-founder and director of studies at the Language Learning Center, which is headquartered in Duisburg in Germany. He has been active in HRM and HRD as a manager and consultant for over 30 years internationally. Ron speaks 3 languages fluently, Spanish, German, and English, of course, where he gets along also with several other languages, such as the Russian. Ron is the innovator of the graphic facilitation concept, ready-made mind maps that promotes teaching, learning methodologies such as TBL and PBL. He has worked on personal development and education-related projects in Houston, Texas, in New York, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., in the United States, and a few other cities such as Hong Kong, London, Glasgow in Scotland, Geneva and Zurich in Switzerland, Amsterdam, Brussels, Paris, Vienna, Moscow in Russia, and even Cairo in Egypt. That is to say how much of a cosmopolitan he is. During his academic career, he has held or still holds many positions, such as lecturing professor and personal developer and planner in a few academic institutions in Germany, as well as director for the Office of Development in the International School of Management. Ron works with many Fortune 500 and DAX companies as a consultant and is an active member of numerous teaching organizations in Belgium, UK, Germany, France, and Greece. Lastly, he is a regular speaker at conferences, and he conducted workshops, talks, webinars internationally, promoting the idea of TBL and PBL, and mind mapping in second language learning teaching. So that is to say how much massive his achievements are. With no further ado, I want to begin by putting things into perspective. So as you know, in the past few months with the coronavirus crisis and the shutdown of all the academic institutions all over the world, the universities, the research centers, etc., you have to know that teachers and professors have had their hands full just trying to stay connected with students. And even if the situation is more or less improving, depending on the location, of course, uncertainty is still planning over our heads and in the academic field as well, because we are not in a shelter of another confinement. We're not safe from another lockdown. So actually, there's never been a time where to actually assess and evaluate students has been more accurate. So with no further ado, I want to have Latifa's opinion about it. Latifa?
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Mohammed. I'm very glad. I'm very honored to be with you. Thank you, Dr. Moran, for accepting to share with us your experience, to shed light on the coping strategies that could be adopted to manage the online assessment. Absolutely, Mohammed, as you said, this period was quite challenging around the world. In Morocco, the ministry, universities, the professors had done a great effort to maintain the contact and maintain what we call the continuity, educational continuity remotely. However, online or remote assessment was not retained for the moment as an option for written exams. Only research and traineeship defenses and oral exams were allowed to be done. All the other exams are postponed till October after remedial courses or remedial sessions. Last week, for example, we organized a distance training for distance learning, and the major questions from lecturers, PhD candidates, etc., were related to assessments. What if the lockdown continues? How could we assess our students? Assessment in normal conditions is quite challenging. What about an online assessment?
Yes. So, with no further ado, Dr. Moraine, we want to ask you the first question, which is, I would like to have your thought about what is assessment in general, and why is it actually important to speak about assessment? And I want you to give our audience here a glimpse by singling out the role of assessment in the learning process.
Well, I want to start by thanking all of you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to have a platform to talk about what we all as academics see as a serious problem. And I have to say that myself, I do teach and have just unbelievable what I've had to encounter in the last 3 months about problem solving when it comes to assessment. So, getting to your question about, what is assessment in general and why it's important, in learning, what I did was I just prepared a few points that I would like to present to you, because I think there needs to be some visualization as I give you these answers right here. And I want everybody to know that I was given the list of questions so I could be better prepared. So Mohammed, if you could, or Abdul Halamin, could you shoot that PowerPoint up there so that we could just look at and visualize so I could kind of answer those questions? Is that going to be possible?
Yes, I'm going to try to share my screen to see if the PPT presentation, yes.
Well, I could answer the questions just without that, okay? That's okay. I'll just answer it and then we can get the visual.
I think it's there.
Oh, okay. Well, then we could just open that up to the first one, okay? Because, Mohammed, that was your first question. If we could just go to the next slide. And what is assessment? Well, I really had to think about, how am I going to answer this question? Because, it could be very complicated about what assessment is. So I want to put assessment in the context of education. And when we look at the term assessment, we refer to, just a wide variety of methods and tools, I have to say, that educators use to plan for their classes, their lectures, and how they're going to implement their lectures. And when I say implement, what's actually meant there, what's implied, is going to be methodology, okay? And then, of course, evaluate. And when I say evaluate, I don't mean assessment. I actually mean evaluate in the sense of, how are we going, because, assessment is not just one thing. So how are we going to actually evaluate if what we're doing and how we're doing something actually is working, maybe during the classes. So we got to actually, build in assessment into assessment. So we have something called assessment, okay? Assessing assessment, okay? And also to measure the learning. Is the learning really taking place that we planned, and checking to see if it's working, what's not working. And of course, we need some kind of documentation of the academic readiness of a student. And here we're going to get into, because what you see here in this definition is different kinds of assessment. There's not just one kind of assessment. And I'm going to get into that, to answer your question. But also we need assessment to check learning progress. We need to also have assessment for skills acquisition. And I have to say, at that point, skills acquisition, there's going to be many different camps about skills acquisition within learning. And are we just teaching students a lot of information, having them regurgitate that information in the form of a final exam to check to see if they were able to memorize what we taught them? Or are we really adding skills to that? And, what skills can we actually assess during the learning process? And of course, we have to just see if all the educational needs are being met. And this is what we call learning objectives and learning outcomes. Now, I'm not going to get into Bloom's taxonomy because that would be too difficult and would kind of distract us a little bit. But, that does involve a little bit of Bloom's taxonomy as well, too. So if we just look at this really quick, one more time, what is assessment? It's going to be about methods, tools. It's going to be about planning. It's going to be about implementation, evaluation, and please let us separate the word evaluation from assessment. These are two different things. It's about measurement. It's about checking. It's about documenting. It's about checking progress. And it's about seeing whether we can or cannot or should actually integrate skills acquisition into the learning process. So if we look at that right there, that's everything that's happening with the term and answers your question, hopefully, about what is assessment. But you asked another question, and that is, why is it important to talk about assessment? So if we go to the next slide here, you'll see that if we could just skip to the next slide. Can we skip to the next slide? Okay. Well, why is it important to talk about assessment? Well, there are so many different things that many people will agree but also disagree upon. But one thing that we can all agree as educators is that assessment is an integral part of any effective educational system or program, and that it is needed. And we as educators, but also parents, elected officials, policymakers, employers, and the general public all want to know whether students are learning successfully and progressing academically. So this is, I think, one of the major reasons why we do need to talk about assessment. Assessment's not the elephant in the room. It's there. It has always been there and has always caused major problems for many learning institutions as to how they're going to deal with it. But, there's a lot of politics involved in assessment. So that's why here I also have policymakers, the decision makers, the power holders. They have a big word in how assessment works. And sometimes that might go against what we maybe as educators believe, but because we're employed within the academic system, we do sometimes have to accept the things that are given to us by policymakers as to what kind of assessments we are actually going to use. And the second thing that I think is important, why should we be talking about this, is that the requirement to demonstrate learners' understanding of a subject matter is critical to the learning process. So, understanding is a very, very important aspect. And that's why I separated from the first part to that first answer to that question, because we need to be able to evaluate whether the educational goals and standards, the objectives and outcomes of learning are being met. And so that actually comes to the end. And what I have to add there is that, we always think, a lot of educators teachers, professors, whatever we want to call ourselves, we always think that, assessment is something that comes at the end, that it's that final exam. It's that tell story, it's going to be that tell all, whether it worked or not. But that's not really true, okay? That there's many things that lead to that end assessment, that final assessment. So that's why it's also important to talk about the different kinds of assessments and also when they should take place. And so we as educators need to learn the different kinds of assessment. I actually believe that while there are many different kinds of assessment that need to take place during the learning instructional process, that I believe that formative assessment actually is the most important of all. It's that thing that we as educators can really learn from. So I'm a big promoter of formative assessment. At the same time, I love, summative assessment because it really causes a lot of challenge for us as educators. So Mohammed, I hope that was the beginning of what you might, hopefully satisfies you in the questions that you asked here about what is assessment in general and why is it important to talk about assessment. So
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Ron. Indeed, as you highlighted, assessment is one of the cornerstones of the learning process. As you said, we need a constructive alignment with the objectives and with the objective learning and the outcomes learning. Assessment, as you said, and I'm totally in and I agree with, should not be the final point, but a starting point when we are by to teach. But as you said, also, it's not a single tool or a single activity. It must be also conceived as a strategy, a whole strategy. My question is this one: what are the strategies of online assessments, and what is the best way to choose the efficient online assessment?
Latifa, I have to say that when I saw the question, and you see the question that you're asking in black and white, it looks like it's a very easy question to answer, okay? But, that's a very difficult question. And I have some people who's here today listening, that when I got this list of questions, I was very challenged because it is a very challenging thing. But, I'm going to get to this thing, right here. And thank you for, bringing up that slide right there. Because, to answer the question, what are the, different strategies? Well, as you said, Latifa, it's not just one thing. It's many different things. And it's a process. Okay, that's another thing. And it's a process that has a beginning and it has several steps and it also has an end as well. Now, I could talk about many different kinds of assessment, but I would like to just really point out three, which I think are very important. And these are the three that cannot be ignored, that must be integrated into every assessment strategy at every educational institution. Now, even if you're running a small language school, private, catering to students' needs like language learning or tutoring, or maybe a community college, maybe it could be a University of Applied Science, it could be a major state university or a private business university. I would say that all universities or institutions of higher education, as well as, of course, primary school and secondary school and, high school, all use these three things, and they're integrated into their strategies of assessment. And one of them is diagnostic, and what we sometimes know as pre-assessment. Now, if you're in the corporate world, you would probably see that as needs analysis. Okay, but if you after that, we have formative assessment, and that's happening during learning and instructional process, and there's different steps for that too. And then we get to the summative, and that is what we sometimes as educators see as the big test, the exit exam. So these three kinds of assessment are the three major kinds that should be integrated into all kinds of any kind of assessment strategies that are being created at any institution of higher learning, or like I said, just even primary schools or high schools. So this is the strategy right here. But, in order to really get a better idea, because, you're asking the question, what do I feel? Because your question says, what is the most effective, or efficient online assessment strategy? Now, Latifa, I do not want to burst your bubble, but I do have to say that, there is no one-size-fits-all strategy. It does depend on the kind of educational institution that we're looking at. What we use for assessment strategies in high school might not be the same thing that we're going to be using at the entry point of university. And when you look at a university, you'll see that the assessment strategies are not going to be the same for entry students or freshman students as probably maybe third or fourth year students at a university. So assessment strategies change depending not only on the institution, but at what point the learner is at within that institution. And we all have different ideas of what they're going to be. But I would like to go to the next slide right here, if we could. And let's look at some diagnostic assessment, now, I could get into, really deep just into diagnostic assessment. Now, when we look at diagnostic assessment, this is a high stakes game right here. Diagnostic assessment is a multi-billion-dollar industry throughout the world. Now, especially, when we're looking at standardized tests. Now, I don't want to name any test right here, but I think we all know what those tests are. Every country has their test, and a lot of them are owned by the cultural ministry or maybe institutions, nonprofit institutions connected to maybe the government or cultural ministries, and those are connected to whether students can study in a country or not. So those are diagnostic tests as well too. So again, that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And then those are external exams. But we also have internal diagnostic assessment that universities form themselves, whether students are going to meet the prerequisites in order to study at a university. And so that's a diagnostic assessment as well too. Then we can go, a little bit, lower on that list right there, maybe to point 3, which would be that professors sometimes have students take diagnostic tests to see if they're ready. Do they have the pre-knowledge to actually take part in the lectures or the learning process that they're going to be taking place? So there's different kinds of purposes for a diagnostic test, but are the learners at a place where they should be in order to enter, or do they know where they want to go? Because we're looking at purpose right here, and diagnostic tests always also determine what's the best way to get there. Because from looking at the results, and let us not forget that the results of diagnostic tests, we're looking at metrics, we're looking at analytics. This has a lot to do with that, and us understanding how to really ask the right questions in order to get the right, create the right metrics and the analytics that we're going to have to do good planning, not only for content, but for methodology as well. And diagnostic tests also help us to form summative assessments in the end. So again, it's, as I said here, they occur before the instruction. This is diagnostic tests occur before instruction takes place, and will determine whether a student can enter or not enter into a learning process or an institution. And also at the use of the information, will we as teachers and students use it to determine whether they're ready and they know what they need to know. And also that teachers can plan instruction and assessment that are differentiated and personalized. Now, it's that last point right there that becomes very complicated when it comes to diagnostic tests, because we've got teachers who are very fixed in the way they instruct, and that could conflict. When we look at the metrics, when we look at the results or the analytics that come out of a diagnostic test, this could actually, this is what's called the fitting process, because sometimes what we learn from a diagnostic test, the results, we need to fit teachers into what the results are, and sometimes that could be a bad fit. Now, I have to say that I'm the owner of several institutions, private institutions, and diagnostic tests are very important for me. I need them in order to find the right teacher for the right group and the right company. So this is, for me, it's a very long process. It's very time consuming, and it's expensive, I have to say. But it's needed in order for me to make the right fit and group people and put people into the right groups and give them the right teacher in order for them to meet their goals. So this is what's really being formed right here, and all the strategies that really all the knowledge that you need to have in order to create the right strategies, in order that everybody is happy at the end when there is an exit exam. So diagnostic assessment is where we start, but let's move on to formative. Okay, so that would move us here. And Latifah, when I looked at your question, I thought to myself, do I get into strategies about, formative assessment? And I really thought long and hard, because I did have the questions long enough to really decide how I would answer that question. So I decided to answer this question, or this part of the question, with 10 reasons why we should be using formative assessment in our lessons. I thought that would be a better approach to answer that. So could we move to the next slide here? And I want to give you those 10 reasons why we should be using formative assessment. One of the first thing, and I tried to prioritize this, and this took me almost half a day to try to prioritize these 10 points that I came up with, because it was pretty easy for me to brainstorm them. And I don't know if I'm really so happy with the way the order that I put it in, but this is what I could come up with in 4 hours. And I have to tell you, this one slide took me 4 hours of thinking, okay, to put it together. And this is what I believe are the 10 reasons why we should be using formative assessment. The number one reason, I think, is to integrate formative assessment into the learning process. That's the first reason we should be using formative assessment. We need to inform students as soon as possible that formative assessment is going to take place, and we need to also tell them when it's going to take place and what kind of role does that formative assessment play in maybe the final notes and marks that they are going to be getting. Now, I am a true believer that not only does formative assessment, that we need to educate our learners about formative assessment and inform them how important it is. But if you really look at another word for really what is formative assessment, it's feedback. And we as instructors, we need that feedback from students. It's not something about, letting them feel that they're part of that, because that's the psychological thing that's going on. That yes, they want to have a voice and they want to have a choice about what's going on, about content and methodology and approaches that we're using to instruct. But we also need that feedback from them. So, it's a 50-50 thing going on. And I've had some controversy about this as well, too. But, let's get to point number 2. Find out, how much your students remember from a previous lesson. We need that information. Are they learning? Can they remember, something? And if they can't remember, when we're doing this formative assessment, maybe it's time for us to be thinking about reteaching something. There's nothing wrong with reteaching. We make mistakes as educators by believing that we just, we have a syllabus, we meet it, this is what's going to be done on day 1, day 2, day 3, or, lesson 1, lesson 2, or lecture 1 and 2. We forget about formative assessment, how important it is, and sometimes that we might have to reteach some things that students are not getting. Number 3, again, it says, assess understanding of content and help form your future lessons. That goes back into, am I teaching too fast? Am I teaching too much? What are they not understanding? And here, well, if they understand everything, this is what every professor dreams of. Well, let's just don't teach what the students already know. This is this is the wonderful thing when we get great results. Number 4, gather information about individual students' progress. Now, I've integrated actually another kind of assessment in there, but it's actually formative as well. We do need to know how our students as an individual are progressing. And if we do our formative assessment right, and there's all kinds of tools we can use, I'm going to show you some real quickly. Then we can see not only how the group is progressing, but we can actually see how individuals in the group. And, some people say, oh, I have 300 students. Well, I have sometimes 400 students as well. But I'm able to still do it. And I can do it within 30 minutes because of knowing how to work the metrics and the analytics and asking the right questions and using the right tool. Got to put all of that together to form a good, assessment strategy, a formative assessment strategy. Number 5, we want to collect information about the various learning styles of our students, and we can check that. We can ask them questions. Did you like this? Did you like that a PowerPoint that I did? Or did you like that video that I showed you? Or did you listen to this right here? All the taking into consideration all the different learning preferences and styles that students might have, and that we're integrating them. And it is possible to integrate that even into very frontal kinds of, lectures. But we can get feedback from our students, and we can maybe do more of something that they like or less of something that they don't like from the formative assessment that we're actually conducting. Number 6, discover students who might need instruction outside the time of regular lessons. That is going to come up there where we start seeing very low scores there. And that, of course, in comparison to maybe the medium scores, we can see the learning curves there. And we're able to determine, depending on, the, privacy issues here, whether we actually have the students' names, we have their student numbers, how we conduct the formative assessment. We're able to identify those students. We can sit down with them in our office hours. We can call them up. I can meet them online, because of the current situation. I meet all my students online. And I talk to them and I tell them, these are the things I think you should do to help yourself. Maybe you might want to catch up on this, repeat this lesson right here. Or maybe I could suggest a tutor for you. These are all the things that can come out of there, because we should be helping the students and creating some strategies and some solutions for them, not just for us, but for them as well. And we also need to look at differentiated instruction. Is the instruction methods that we're using, and this is able to come out of, with formative assessment, that maybe the instruction methodologies that we're using, maybe they're not working. Okay, maybe we might need to try something else. And maybe we have a group of learners that are very interested in one way of learning, and then we've got different levels of knowledge. And, you know, this was, I have to say that number 7 was the hardest thing I had as a young teacher. And it took me several years to figure out number 7. I think it is one of the most difficult things that an instructor or a professor or teacher has to learn how to work with. And it takes a while. And there's no one solution for one teacher, but you really do have to learn how to work with differentiated learning and the different strategies that you need. But it can be identified through formative assessment. Number 8, control the user friendliness of an online learning experience. Sometimes, you know, and we'll get this too by asking the right questions. What do they find difficult with the online content? You know, getting to it, accessibility, usability, all of these things. We can actually, you know, ask our students that, and that helps us to get, you know, back to the people who helped us create the online program, and maybe change some things to make it more user-friendly. And we can find that out, again, through the feedback that we get from the formative assessment. And reward learners for participation. This is the point that I feel that there's some controversy there. We shouldn't be using formative assessment to reward people or use it as sort of a trick to get them to participate in it. But, you know, it's tit for tat, quid pro quo. And if we want something and we need that information, we need those metrics, we need the analytics, what's going to motivate these students to, take place in this? And we do have to reward them. Now, the way I reward them is that I make 10 to 15%, and the most is 15% because I do 3 steps of formative assessment. I do it 3 times within a semester. And each time that the students take place, that's 5% of their final grade. And that in and of itself, yes, it's an incentive. It's motivation for them to take part because we do need that information. And it's a reward for them because they'll be more truthful, hopefully, and, fill out all the questions because we're able to see what students didn't fill out the questions and who did and didn't fill out the formative assessment completely. And of course, the way I put it, they can't turn it in unless they fill out all the questions. They're not going to get that reward. And number 10 is identify if learners are ready for the summative assessment. This, I have to say, I keep very good statistics about my learners and from the formative assessments that I do. And part of my formative assessments, in fact, 2 of them are, it's 3, are mock exams. So I have a lot of mock exams that I do as formative assessment. This, of course, reduces the stress levels at the real exam, but it gives me the information that I need. It gives me the metrics, the analytics that I need in order to make sure that final exam, that exit exam, is right for them. And I have even taken some students to the side and told them, it's better if you drop this class, or it's better if you just start it again next semester. You already know how it works. Here's some, strategies for you so that you can prepare for next semester because you won't pass the exam. And these 10 points, I feel, are hopefully, Latifa, a better answer to some of the strategies and the reasons why we should be using formative assessment. Well, okay, now that I've said all that, okay.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you very much, Ron, for this very rich presentation. Now I want to move to one of the challenges of online assessment. Let me just quick the presentation before. Yes. So I was saying that I want to move now to the challenges of online assessment, because I know that there are a few, since I have experienced them myself as a professor. And what the challenges of online assessment has been one of the main subjects of discussion between all of the professors who have tried to actually proceed to online assessment. And as you know, among the regular problems that professors face are dishonesty and cheating. So lecturer face dishonesty and cheating in online assessment. I want to know, Dr. Moraine, your conception about how can we cope with this issue? For instance, when a student, scores well in a test or in an exam, does it mean that he knows really his material? Or should we, as educators, professors, and teachers, think about a more elaborate way, a more smart way to ask our questions and to test our students?
Well, I have to say that this is not a one-way street. And when you ask that question to me, I have to say that there's always two perspectives. There's going to always be two answers to everything. There's going to be the perspective of the student, and then there's going to be the perspective of the instructor, okay? But the number one thing about cheating, okay, and yes, we all know that it happens. And I have to say, I'm going to start by answering the question, and let's start at the top. Let's start at high stake games. Let's start at these high stake exams that are taking place. These these international standardized exams that students, just get really under stress because they know if they don't pass these, they're going to not be able to study at a university. They're not going to be able to go to another country. They're not going to be able to enter a university because they don't have the language level that's needed. There's a lot of language tests out there. I've had many years experience in working with international standardized tests. There is a tremendous amount of cheating. There is, students can go online right now and find the answers to many of the tests. And I can find it. Again, I do not want to name any names, but I think if you go out there and you really do know, I happen to have students who speak Arabic, and I put together a team of students to research that for me, actually, because I wanted to know the answer to that question. I wanted to know how students were getting the answers to all of these tests. And so we had a French team, a German team, a Spanish team. We had a team that spoke Arabic from many, different Arabic-speaking countries. We had Russian. What else did we have? Italian. We had Turkish as well too. That was and what the students discovered in the first 30 days shocked me, because I was able to see and find, they could show me the sites on Facebook and all the other places where the students actually were sharing the answers to those tests. Now, these international, test agencies say that they guarantee the security of all of this content. But why is it even today, if I go to Facebook, I can find groups that are exchanging not only the answers, but the questions themselves. They know what question, they know the order of the questions and all of these things. So, it's a high stakes game. There's going to always be cheaters. There's going to always be ways to find out the answers. They form groups. They form private groups. Social media makes all of that possible, whether it's a WhatsApp group, a Facebook group, and there's just so many different kinds of social media where they can change that. We are almost helpless and our hands are tied when it comes to the security and cheating when it comes to these standardized tests. But let's go to another aspect here, and let's look at the professors who are using the same exam every semester, and the students. Let's look at the sociological aspect, the sociological aspect of learning. Every teacher knows that if, a seasoned teacher, an experienced teacher knows that the sociological aspects of learning can be a detriment. It can be a barrier. It could be a bad thing for you, but it also could be a good thing for you if you know how to use it. And, I just tell my students, look, I want us to form a WhatsApp group. I want them to communicate with each other. And that's why I do a lot of formative assessment. I do a lot of mock testing. This way, this will hopefully lower, maybe even to the point of eliminating the idea of cheating, because they feel good about themselves. They feel good about the content. They feel they do know. And that, of course, the lower the stress levels, the lower the chances are that you're going to get students who cheat. Now, because we know that students are going to form groups, well, why don't we just become part of the group? Now, what I do is I never form the group. I let the students form the group. They manage the group. They can make me a member if they want to. But sometimes I prefer not to be a member because I want them to feel that they have this safe environment, that they can, exchange information and really take care of all those social needs that are, being, neglected in this face-to-face learning experience, and what sometimes they don't have in the online learning experience. This helps to kind of accommodate for that. So let them do all of that and give them as much information as possible. But again, it gets down to something also deeper, and that is test design. Designing tests that are going to be fit to the content, where the students are not going to be able to, they're going to be challenging tests. That's very important. So cheating's going to always be there, and there's just many ways to deal with it. But we do have to be aware that social media is always going to make it easy for students to come together and hopefully not cheat, but let's just call it exchanging questions and answers. Yes.
Thank you so much, Ron, for all these insights. And we have another great challenge in Morocco, especially for open access universities, which is the large class sizes. We have hundreds to thousands of students per class. These large classes are often in the first year, where there can be a diverse mix of students. Most of them are just starting to get to grips with the academic expectations of university. And as you are a great fan of formative assessments, within large numbers, it's more difficult for formative assessments. How could we tackle the challenge of large numbers?
Latifa, I'm going to disagree with you on one point there. I think with today's technology, with today's apps, and we're talking about free technology, a lot of it, it's free. But, of course, it's better to pay for some of it because, we get more options when we pay for some of the technology. But I feel with today's technology that we really can do very accurate formative assessment. There's so many different apps to use for that. And when we're working at a large institute, the institute can actually buy rights to those to be shared with all the professors, teachers assistants, and all the other instruction staff there. But it can and the metrics and analytics that come from that, it's just very informative to help teachers. So I think that is a misconception that group sizes actually hinder doing formative assessment and doing actually very good formative assessment, which will lead to good metrics and analytics. But that's gone, the days of us doing formative assessment on pieces of paper. And again, we're talking here about online learning. So, again, we've come very far as far as technology is concerned. And it is our responsibility as educators to integrate as many different possibilities to come up with, good metrics and analytics to deal with large group sizes. But, it gets also deeper. Many educators feel that they don't have to learn all of that. And I have some professor friends who actually have assistants who do all that for them. And if they have somebody else doing it for them, that's okay too. Because at the end of the day, as long as we're getting good metrics and analytics to help us to be better educators, to do better assessment, summative assessments, then, we're doing our job. But there's a lot out there. In fact, I was going to show a link. I have it in this PowerPoint presentation. I hope that you share this with online and let anybody who wants it have it, because there is a link there that I find to be one of the best links for a formative assessment and all the tools and apps that you could use for that. It's actually there. If you scroll down to after the 10 reasons that, there's a link there that I put, and I think there's about 40 different sources there for you to use. I have to say that I have my favorites, and I use them all the time, and I get my results within 45 minutes. And I have sometimes very large groups. In fact, when I'm doing my webinars, I have sometimes up to 500 people, and I can have those metrics within 15 minutes.
Thank you very much for clearing this up, Dr. Ron. I will definitely share the link with our audience. And thank you for enlightening us about this large-size classes challenge, which has been a challenge of ours since we have struggled with that in the lockdown, and we will struggle with that in the future as well. Now, Dr. Ron, I want to get to a very, very sensitive matter that I found only fair to acknowledge, which is inequities. Since we are speaking with no double talk in this webinar, one of the obvious facts is that our students don't come from the same social background. Some of them may be more privileged than others financially. Some of them don't have access to technology whatsoever. So this leads to my question. How can we put everyone on an equal footing? And how can we proceed to an online assessment with no inequities? And of course, how can we remedy this delicate and tricky situation?
Mohammed, when I saw that question, 100 things went through my mind, because the current situation that we find ourselves in, this COVID-19 disaster, while a lot of people see it as something negative, they see it as bad, I had to sit down and look at it. It led to many challenges that I had to face. But one thing that I have to say that has come out of that is that it has made us face many of the inequities that many different education systems have. Now, I don't want to start comparing one culture or one country with another, saying that one is better than the other, because, I live in Germany. And although Germany is the economic powerhouse of Europe, and any other country who denies that isn't getting good metrics in analytics, okay, they're not doing their formative assessments, okay, but I do have to say that, we're a rich country, but that does not mean that we have the best education system. We have flaws in that education system, and there are a lot of people who are falling through the net, and nothing has made it more clear than the COVID-19 situation. So what I'm really leading to is it's a very difficult problem. It's like a very uncomfortable spider web that we've woven, and it has a lot of politics involved. You can't answer this question without involving politics. when we talk about education, we can never separate politics from education. It is always one of those issues that politicians are always speaking about because they know that people are interested in education for themselves, further education, continuing education for themselves as adults, for their children and for their grandchildren, and for a better future. So here, what we're really looking at when we look at online learning, we're looking at something which we call digital equity. And how do we solve the problems that we're confronted with when we look at digital equity? And we see that, of course, socioeconomic factors play a large role. Many students don't have access to the internet. They don't have the right equipment. How do we solve that problem? And then we get into something else. It's just not the I first said it's politics. Then we have socioeconomic factors when we're dealing with digital equity. But there's also, when we look at it at an institutional level, diversity management. And what kind of metrics and analytics do we, as from at the university level, have access to tell us, and warn us? There's warning signs that come out of asking, this. When we get to diagnostic assessment at the university level, when we're are at entry level, what do we know about our students? Do we know that our students are coming from a socioeconomic background that they're not going to have the things that are necessary for them to have success? And let's look at the dropout rates after first semester and second semester. What's leading to that? Okay, so retention rates and attrition rates, all of those metrics and analytics that we need to make good decisions that could lead to solving the problems that we have to deal with digital equity. So there's many factors that you have to look at, and it's the responsibility of a university, of and any institution of higher learning, to deal with all of these things and get politics involved, make the connections, make people aware. And now I have to say that I am a member of a group of educators. We believe very much in what we do. There's 52 of us in my organization. And we raise over 250,000 euro a year that we get from donations and events that we hold. And we spend that money every year. We're just private people who believe in doing the right thing. We want to, the government cannot solve everything. Private citizens need to get involved as well. And I feel responsible to help children, young people, especially those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, to have a chance and a good future, just like everyone else. And we buy laptops for these people. We know who they are because the schools tell us who they are, and we don't want them to feel embarrassed about it. We have dinners, we give them out as prizes. It's the way we do it. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that they have everything they need to be successful so that they can build a better future for themselves and, create some kind of dream that they can make their dreams come true. I love working with young learners throughout the world. I've been working with them now in Russia and in different countries that I travel to. It's amazing what we learn as educators. But again, we're dealing with politics and all the issues of digital equity. And it is a very complicated problem, but I feel it's about awareness, making people aware to the point that they want to get involved and be someone who makes a difference in someone else's life. And then that way, we get everybody involved. I can only say, I'm only speaking for myself, I'm involved because I believe that so much because, Many people don't know this about me, but I come from a farming family. My father was a farmer and came from a very poor family. But one thing he knew, he worked very hard. And I saw my father work hard, but he didn't want that for us. He told us, I don't want any of my children to ever be farmers, because he knew what a hard job that is. He worked hard to send 5 children to university. All of us are doctors. And my father was a farmer. How could I not believe that you can have a better future when I come from that background?
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for this great lesson as well for our students who are watching us today, to keep believing in their dreams. I'm like you. I always believe that I could have a better future on working hard and learning. Thank you so much, Ron, for this. I will go to another kind of motivation, actually, but the lecturer's side, I could say. Mm-hmm. As you said, ideally, the methods of assessments we use should more than a word, a grade. They need to serve as an aid to students' learning, to allow them to gauge their progress, to get feedback, like you said, about their strengths, their weaknesses, and to help them consolidate their learning. This fits with that concept that we call assessment for learning. However, this assessment also has to meet quality assurance standards. You talked about them in your presentation as well. Assessment design here is a real challenge. How we could convince and motivate lecturers to adopt this approach, and as you said at the beginning, to start by assessment, to don't let it like a final point when we are by to start teaching.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think when we're young as instructors, when we're young professors, we do think about that final test, that big test, the big exam, and we spend so much time on that we forget that there are so many milestones that have to be met before we ever get there. And I have to say that I had a good mentor, not just one, but several. And I am very grateful to them because they taught me right. They made me learn. They were very, very hard on me. And they made a big difference, not only in my life as an educator, but just my life as a human being, actually, because, they played a very important role in my life. And I think what I'm really saying here is that young instructors need good mentors. Just because we've already reached that point that we're there, we think, oh, we're there, we reached it. We're now at the university and now we're teaching. Now I have my steady pay and, everything's going to be great now. But it's not that way. We still need mentors. We need guides to help us. And universities have a responsibility to seek out and find and identify those professors who they can say, these are the good mentors, and then connect them to the younger people so that they can learn. And it takes about 1 to 2 years of good mentoring to really get it all, because we're not going to learn in one semester. So, professors have to step up to the plate. Our university has that, where, I remember when I first started there, actually the mentor that I had, we're very good friends now in my private life, because, she was a very important person and taught me a lot of things that I needed to know. And I have to say that I was very naive, about a lot of things. But definitely, how do we get these professors on board? Mentoring is one way. And then what's the opposite of mentoring? And the opposite of mentoring is reverse mentoring. And reverse mentoring is, and the best teachers I've ever had were my students. And where did I get that information? How did I learn from them? It was through formative assessment. It was not through summative assessment that I got the information that I needed to become a better instructor and to create better summative exams. Because I could see from what they were telling me that, hey, I need to change my methods. I need to change the content. They're not getting this right. So talking to your students, creating channels of communication is extremely important. And formative assessment is one channel of communication. Our office hours are another. And we know when we're doing distance learning, and I have to say, this is that good thing that came out of this corona, crisis, is that I spend time with my students online. When they say they have a problem, I get on Zoom, I make an appointment with them, and we talk. It's private, it's face-to-face. They feel it's very personal, and they tell me things. And look, I know you're never too old to learn, and I'm always learning. I think that's what keeps me young. In fact, I told my doctor that I don't know what I would do without my job. I probably would get old in maybe 1 year. And many people think that I'm in my 40s because when they see me, but the thing is, it's these students and all the challenges that they give me by formative assessment and face-to-face conversations with them that help me to become a better teacher and keep me young, by the way, too. Although they give me a lot of problems and I have a lot of stress, I love my job and I love listening to them. So again, it's mentoring, good communication with students, keep that formative assessment going. That's going to help us to, get that. And you know what? If there are any professors here listening today, I want to say to you that continuing professional development is extremely important. And maybe you might need to take a class or a workshop on how to create better tests and how to work with formative assessment and maybe summative assessment. And there's workshops for that, not maybe at your university, but at other universities. And all you got to do is go online, step up to the plate and do it, because that's what's going to make you a better instructor. And let us not forget that if you're an instructor, you have accepted lifelong learning. And if you don't accept lifelong learning and step up to the plate and take up some kind of a workshop to help you to become a better instructor, then you're not doing your job as an instructor or as a teacher or as a professor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morin, for this clarification. Since actually we are running out of time, this will be my last question. So, Dr. Ron, as I follow you, of course, on social media, one of the most striking things that I noticed, other than your massive biography, of course, at Smashwords, was your Facebook cover page, which says, "The new normal self-directed learning is something we live." To be honest, when I first read it the first time, I was pretty mesmerized by it because it felt so real and so truthful as we are living in the new normal under the current circumstances. That is the question that I was wondering. And should we as professors get accustomed to what you call the new normal? Should we forget about traditional learning standards? Since it's a very realistic and authentic matter, I want to know, Dr. Morin, your sentiment about it.
I come from a very traditional background, and I had a very traditional education when I really look at it. There was no such thing as online learning. And the university that I actually started at was one of the first universities in the United States to actually work with distance learning. And they did distance learning by, it was sort of an interdisciplinary approach where they took the students from the communications department who were actually setting up the radio and television stations, teaching them how to, be journalists and television journalism and all that, and connected that to the education department, and did a lot of recorded lectures that they showed on television. Now this was we're talking about the late 50s and early 60s, and this is the university that I went to. So again, they were one of the first ones and pioneers in that. But whether it's face-to-face or online, and this is just something about, it's just a given factor of, no matter if you call it remote learning, distance learning, online learning, computer-assisted learning, e-learning, or mobile learning, okay? There is an integrated factor of self-directed learning. When we look at dropout rates and how, success rates, one of the things that really leads to success rates and also to dropout rates is the factor of self-directed learning. So the more a person or a learner is self-directed, the higher the chances are that they will bring a learning process to an end. In other words, they will graduate, they will start, and they will and finish at the university because they have a higher sense of self-direction, self-motivation. And this starts at an early age. And if we can teach them at an early age to be self-directed, then we will instill that into them. So by the time they get to the higher education, university level, it's easier for them actually to take more responsibility of the success of their learning. So, it's a cultural thing, and the cultural factor plays a huge role in this. When we look at cultures where the teacher plays the dominant role, the role that everything is, it's teacher directed instead of student directed, then if we look at cultures where it's very student directed, we will probably see, if we look at the metrics and the analytics and the information that we can gather, that probably online learning probably will have the higher dropout rates than from cultures where students are very self-directed. So that's why I'm a huge believer not only in TBL and problem-based learning and project-based learning and performance-based learning, and that's part of this thing right here too, is service learning. All of these things are very important and need to be integrated into the methodologies of instruction in cultures and, throughout in any education system. But it becomes more difficult. All these things that I just named become more difficult in cultures where they're teacher-oriented, cultures. So we got to get away from that. In order for us to have success, last word here is you must build cultures of self-directed learning. And this will lead to higher success rates in any, whether it's high school or university, whether it's online, e-learning, computer-assisted, whatever. So self-directed is extremely important because we're moving into a world where everybody does need to take responsibility for their own success and self-development, whether we're a student or a teacher. And we need to be self-directed. Where's that motivation going to come from? It doesn't fall from the sky and it doesn't grow on trees. It needs to be intrinsic. And it needs to be something we learned at an early age. I'm very lucky because my mother's an academic My father might be a farmer, but my mom was an academic. And I have to say, I learned it very early. And it was just part of me. And that's why I believe that this is the reason my brothers and sisters, I'm the youngest, by the way, that we all had success when it came to education and our professions, because we had strong parents who taught us that at an early age. We had strong teachers. We had strong mentors. And there's nothing wrong with traditional education. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. We need rules. We need those standards. And I believe in that. People say I'm a little bit conservative, but I'm not. Because I have to say that when I compare myself to other successful people, I would say that they also had traditional educations, and they had rules, and they knew what the rules were, and they followed those rules, and they took responsibility for their own learning. And that's self-directed learning. So that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Ron. We are for all these insights. Self-directed learning, learning to learn. That's exactly what we need. It's a great paradigm shift that will need a great work from all of us.
I'd like to ask you a question, Latifa. Is Morocco, would you say, if you looked at, let's just, my question is geared more to high school education. Is it very teacher-centered, or do we have aspects of student-directed learning, student-driven learning in high schools in Morocco?
It's more teaching. It's more teacher-directed. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm talking about a paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
That we are starting here in Morocco to think and to talk about it, to change the how we are doing, how we are teaching today, to give more, I could say, responsibility to students. As you said, more self-directed, self-assessment, self-learning as well.
Mm-hmm.
But in high school, it's more teachers directed. Yes.
I look forward to coming to Morocco and meeting teachers and showing them how easy it is to make that change to task-based learning and project-based learning, because it is the easiest way to instill self-directed learning into young people.
But there is a great movement right now, and like you say, there is a great reform that we will start next year, even on the higher education, and the movement is goes in this direction, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Ron, for this share.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe now we have to move to the audience questions. I have a very direct one and very practical one, I could say. Could you share with us some practical tools and ideas to do formative assessments?
So I was ready for that question because I knew it was going to come. And can we go to the PowerPoint presentation? I have a slide for that.
I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. I think we're getting there, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And Mohammed, can you click that, please? That link?
Yes.
And then just, I'm just going to, if you just like slowly scroll down once that's there. You might have to mark it and then.
So, do you see my screen now?
Because I see it. Mm-hmm.
Of course. Okay. So let's start with the Edulastic.
If you could, did you click that already, or
see the full review? Yes.
I don't see the result of the click. That I don't see.
The result of the click. I'm gonna try.
Sure. Okay. And while you're trying, I'm just going to try to answer the question without that.
Okay.
I have to say that there are many tools to use for formative assessment. Now, again, we're talking here about online learning, okay? Because, I don't want to get into face-to-face learning because those are different methods, okay? And when we get to formative assessment, I'm going to combine several things in that answer. And one of them is when we're dealing with online learning, we need to deal with technology. We cannot separate technology and the apps from formative assessment. And there are so many different apps to use, and it's our understanding of formative assessment. So while I can give you some of the things that I use, okay, I use Mentimeter. Mentimeter is just such a great tool to use, okay? Oh, you got it, okay? Perfect. So if you could scroll down just a little bit. I think you went to the bottom page there. Go to the top.
This one. Is it this one?
It's a very long page.
Very long page.
Yeah, it has all the tools. Exactly. You're doing the right thing. You're just scrolling. Okay, stop right there. There's Mentimeter, okay? That one is the one that I use, okay? It's so easy to use. And let me say something about this, okay? We get into some little things here because we were talking about digital, equity, and what access do the people have? Now, we assume that everybody's going to, be online when we actually do the formative assessment. But the good thing about Mentimeter is that it's great for an iPhone or, an Android phone. You can actually, you ask the questions before, they get a code that gets them into there. And the questions are already there. And what I like to do is when I do teach business English. I have an MBA, so of course I teach, business English, and I love teaching business English, but I need to know what my students are learning. So I always ask 10 questions. It's always 10. The mathematics are easier, okay? Because we're dealing in, of 10%, 20%, Now, if I, then I could ask 15 questions or, 20 questions. And the students answer the questions. And once the students have answered the questions, and I know how many students I have, I know how many students are online, and I expect every student who's online to answer those questions. And I know now with Mentimeter, I'm not able to see who the person is, but at least I'm going to get some, analytics that I'll know. How much are they remembering? How much do they understand? I ask true and false questions. I ask yes and no questions, and I ask multiple choice questions. And I do a good mix of those so that I can get a good understanding of what my students are understanding, and that helps me to better plan. And then I'll do maybe another, Mentimeter questionnaire about, how are they getting along? How do they like the technology? What about the methods? Do they have any I give them one possibility to give me information from their personal opinion. And if you understand the psychology of assessment, you'll understand that if you give too many choices, that students and even adults, whether they're, university students or adults, sometimes students see assessment, especially formative assessment, and when we see it as feedback, they see that as their chance to voice their discontentment with someone. And you've got to be able to formulate your questions in a way where they're not going to be able to, we want to know what they're happy with and what they're not happy with. But, if they're discontent with the state of the world affairs, well, that has nothing to do with me, and what I'm teaching. And sometimes students will say things like that, and they know that I'm an American, and they say, I hate your president. Well, I tell them, I have lived in Europe for 30 years. Angela Merkel is my president, so, I don't know what you're talking about. You can get some really crazy things. You got to really formulate your questions right. You got to also make sure that they answer all the questions before they can submit that, or they won't be able to submit it. So again, Mohammed, if you could just scroll to the top a little bit more. Again, there are, I think if you scroll all the way to the top, Mohammed, and here you're seeing nothing but apps, and it'll tell you if they're free or if you have to pay. You can get this as a PDF if you want, but I think it's the most informative, page that I ever found on the internet for apps and technology, free. A lot of them are free, that I could use for formative instruction. It's so easy. Don't get scared of formative of assessment. It's fantastic. We learn a lot about who we are, what we're doing. We learn about our content, and we need that feedback to improve. And let us not forget that although we're teachers, we also need to be learning during this process. And you have to ask yourself, what are you learning? What do I really know about my students? If I ask a teacher that at the middle of the semester and they're not able to answer that question for me, then I ask myself, how involved is this teacher in the students' learning? Or is the teacher just walk into the room, give the lecture, say what they have to say, and get out? Because I have a few colleagues like that as well, too, and they're always going to be like that. And there's nothing I can do or say other than just to be a good role model. I actually have people who dislike me because I am a good role model. They don't want me to be around me because they think that I'm not sincere, that I'm being unreal. But I'm just who I am. And I love teaching. I love my job. I take it very seriously. And I always want to learn. And I learn from my students through these apps. So that was the answer to the question, Latifa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ron, for this.
Thank you so much, Ron, for the answer of the question. Actually, I have another question from the crowd, and this time it concerns the summative assessment. So it says, how to identify if learners are generally ready for the summative assessment?
Now, what I do, this is where the formative assessment plays a huge role on what, the decisions that you're making for the summative assessment, because, many teachers or instructors or professors already have the test right at the beginning of the semester. And, then they don't realize, hey, from the information that I'm getting from the students, they might have to eliminate some of the questions because they didn't deal with that material. That's one thing that they're getting from, the formative assessment. But, then there's some questions that are formulated in such a difficult way or the students can't understand. So they got to practice that with the students. Professors and students have to, develop a communication channel with one another so that they understand each other, because this is going to help the summative assessment work better. And the better it works, the more it's connected to content and what the students understand and know, because that's what you're checking at the end. I had one professor tell me in the teacher's room one day, Ron, you have to trick the students. You have to create tricks and traps for them. And I looked at him and I go, what do you mean? He said, yeah, you have to trick them. And I looked at him and I said, I had some great teachers and none of my teachers ever tricked me and none of them created traps for me. That's not learning. That sounds like hunting, but it's not learning. It's not teaching. This isn't a fox hunt or, where we want to eliminate people. But some professors believe that, create very difficult tests with very difficult answers that sometimes has nothing to do with the content that they taught. And when you really look at it, and a study was done by Harvard University, they asked the students what they learned after they left the lecture, and then they asked the teachers what they taught, and the answers weren't the same. So you have to think, what we think we're teaching is not what students are learning. So, you got to take that into consideration as well as when you're doing your formative and summative, assessments.
Thank you so much, Ron. Maybe a last question, Mohammed. What is the difference between assessment of learning and assessment for learning?
Well, while that sounds like it's just a matter of preposition and conjunction or whatever, it's semantics, It's not semantics. It's actually very difficult because if you look at assessment for learning, normally that's going to be diagnostic, okay? When we say this is assessment for learning, that's diagnostic. And that usually takes place before, because we need to get some information from the learners. Where are they? What do they know? Pre-knowledge. And by the way, when we talk about pre-knowledge, I just want to throw, look at and Google Merrill's principles of knowledge. That will help teachers to understand that. So assessment for learning is diagnostic, and assessment of learning can be formative or summative. That's how I see it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ron Moraine, for all of your answers. And I think that we are running out of time already. So in terms of the recap, I can say that the most important thing for assessment in the online environment is to focus on the learner's achievement in terms of the instructional goals and objectives. And I can also say that assessment isn't just about grades. It helps students gear up for success by challenging them to reflect, to interact, to apply their knowledge. They should definitely see assessment as a springboard and not as a finality. And is there anything you wanted to add, Latifa?
It's okay. Thank you so much. I would like to finish maybe by a sentence that we could escape easily the consequences of poor teaching, but for the students, it's very difficult to escape the consequences of poor assessments. Thank you so much, Ron, for sharing this insights with us. Thank you, Mohammed, for your invitation. Thank you for Halim and Sirpak for this very important and quite important, I could say, webinars in English, because we are more French speakers, all of us.
We need to say that this is the first.
Thank you so much for this.
English. And of course, the first of so many, I hope.
I want to thank all your team. I want to thank the whole team for making this possible, and thank you for inviting me. It's always a challenge. I have to say, I love these little challenges because, it just makes me really think about what I do and what we do as professors and teachers. And it's information that we need to share. And it is about sharing our information as instructors, as educators. This is very important. So again, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank the team for making it possible.
You're so welcome. Is there anything you wanted to add, Dr. Ron Moraine? Maybe something you wanted to say to the audience?
I want to thank everybody for coming, and hopefully we'll see each other again. And also follow me on Facebook, because I use my Facebook as a blog. I don't have time to write blogs. I have to do assessments. Okay. But follow me on Facebook. I always post didactical, pedagogical information that's shared And I have to say that my, things that I post on Facebook reach over 3 million instructors all over the world. It's shared with everyone, and some people share it and they share it and whatever. It's unbelievable the metrics and analytics that I get just from all of that. But follow me on Facebook, and you'll get always information that's useful to you as a teacher, an instructor, or a professor to make yourself a better instructor and inform yourself a little bit more about what we do. And to at the end of the day, we know that we're catering to Generation Wi-Fi. And if you're doing this right here, you better know all the tools and things that you need so that you can cater to Generation Wi-Fi.
Thank you. We are very much grateful to you. And thank you to the audience, of course, for tuning in. Thank you, Latifa. Thank you, Abdul Halim. And I hope that we will see each other again for another webinar about another interesting subject. So I think we should call it quick. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.